You are 35 years old and working at the JCO Nuclear Fuel Processing Facility in Tokaimura, Japan, on September the 30th, 1999, a day that is not supposed to be unusual. Because the task you are assigned involves preparing uranium fuel for a research reactor, something that has been done before, even though the official procedure requires automated systems and strict safety limits that are quietly being bypassed to save time. Together with two co-workers, you manually pour a uranium solution into a precipitation tank, and because the process is being done by hand, instead of with measuring equipment designed to prevent this exact scenario, the amount added exceeds the critical mass threshold without anyone realizing it in time. At 10:35 am, the solution goes critical. A sudden blue flash fills the room, a visible sign of a nuclear chain reaction occurring outside a reactor. And because you are standing closest to the tank, your body absorbs an estimated radiation dose of around 17 sieverts within seconds, a level so extreme that it destroys DNA faster than cells can divide and repair, effectively stripping the body of its ability to heal itself. You do not collapse immediately, which becomes one of the reasons the situation is initially misunderstood. You are conscious, able to speak, and able to walk. And this delay between exposure and collapse creates the false impression that survival might be possible, even as radiation damage is already unfolding invisibly at the cellular level, rewriting the rules of what your body can recover from. Within days, doctors realize that your white blood cell count has dropped almost to zero, meaning your immune system no longer functions, and as this becomes clear, your condition turns into something modern medicine has never had to confront in quite this way. A living body that cannot regenerate tissue at all. Your skin begins to fail because damaged cells cannot be replaced, blood vessels rupture internally and cannot seal themselves, and infections emerge that your body has no ability to fight. Yet treatment continues, involving massive blood transfusions, experimental stem cell transplants taken from a sibling, and repeated skin grafts that slough off because the underlying tissue cannot sustain them. Your heart stops more than once during this period, and each time it does, you are resuscitated, not because recovery is expected, but because stopping treatment would require an explicit decision to let you die, something no individual doctor wants to formally authorize, especially under public and institutional pressure. This continues for 83 days. During that time, machines take over more and more bodily functions. Organ failure progresses in stages, and the gap between biological survival and meaningful recovery becomes impossible to ignore, a reality later acknowledged by medical staff, who state that there was no realistic chance of survival early on, only the prolongation of bodily processes. On December 21st, 1999, after multiple cardiac arrests and total organ failure, your body finally shuts down. Hisashi Uchi's death becomes infamous not because it was sudden or violent, but because it exposed the limits of medical intervention, raising lasting questions about whether survival was ever the goal, or whether the situation crossed into something closer to involuntary endurance once recovery was no longer possible. Almero tragedy, 1985. You are 13 years old, living in the town of Almero, Colombia. In November 1985, beneath the Nevado del Ruiz volcano, which has shown signs of activity for months, prompting warnings that are discussed, delayed, and ultimately not acted upon with urgency, allowing daily life to continue as if the danger will remain theoretical. On the night of November 13th, the volcano erupts, melting its glacial ice and sending massive lahars, fast-moving volcanic mudflows, down into the valley, overwhelming Almero within minutes, destroying homes, burying streets, and killing tens of thousands of people almost immediately. You survive the initial surge. When rescuers reach you, they find you trapped in the remains of your house, your lower body pinned beneath concrete and debris, your legs submerged in water and entangled with wreckage and the body of a relative, making it physically impossible to pull you free without heavy machinery that does not arrive in time. What does arrive are journalists. As rescue efforts stall, cameras begin recording, and over the next 2 to 3 days, your situation becomes one of the most widely documented individual tragedies in modern history. Not because of mystery, but because your suffering is visible, continuous, and unresolved. Rescuers attempt improvised solutions, placing a tire around your upper body to keep you upright as the water level rises and falls, attempting to pump water out, negotiating limited resources, in a disaster zone that is already overwhelmed, while doctors on site determined that the only way to save you would be to amputate your legs, a procedure impossible without proper surgical equipment, anesthesia, and sterile conditions. Throughout this time, you remain conscious for long stretches, speaking with rescuers and journalists, sometimes calmly, sometimes confused. As circulation to your legs is cut off, infection develops, and prolonged exposure and trauma begin to overwhelm your body's ability to compensate. The footage shows your eyes reddening as blood vessels rupture under stress, your energy fading, and your speech becoming less consistent. As sepsis and exhaustion take hold, all while the world watches, largely powerless as time passes without resolution. After approximately 60 hours trapped in place, you die on November 16, 1985. Omaira Sanchez becomes a symbol not just of natural disaster, but of systemic failure because her death was not instantaneous, hidden or uncertain, but slow, public, and shaped by delayed warnings, inadequate infrastructure, and the inability to act decisively once the moment for prevention had already passed. Darren Rainey. You are locked inside a small concrete shower stall in the Dade Correctional Institution, and the water coming from the pipes is not warm or uncomfortable. It is scalding, measured later at temperatures high enough to cause severe burns, and you are alone inside with no way to regulate it yourself. The door is sealed. As the water hits your skin, it doesn't stay on the surface, it overwhelms it, stripping away the body's ability to cool itself, and within minutes your skin begins to blister and peel. The outer layers failing under heat your body was never meant to endure, while steam fills the enclosed space and makes breathing harder with every second. You scream for help. Other inmates hear it. Guards hear it. According to later testimony, the screams go on for a prolonged period, but no one opens the door and the water continues to run, turning the stall into something closer to an enclosed heat chamber than a shower. Because of your schizophrenia, your distress is treated as misbehavior rather than medical emergency, and the longer you remain inside, the more your body loses its ability to regulate blood pressure, temperature, and oxygen as burns worsen and dehydration accelerates at a catastrophic rate. When the door is finally opened, you are unresponsive. Your body temperature is dangerously elevated, your skin shows extensive burns, and your internal organs have begun to fail under the combined stress of heat exposure and shock. Yet attempts at resuscitation come too late to reverse what has already happened. An autopsy later reveals that your body was essentially cooked from the inside out, with severe thermal injuries and organ damage consistent with prolonged exposure to extreme heat. And medical experts state that death was not instantaneous, but the result of sustained suffering. Darren Rainey's death is later ruled a homicide. What makes it especially disturbing is not just how you died, but where it happened. Under supervision, behind locked doors, inside a system designed to maintain control, where intervention was possible at multiple points and simply did not happen. Your death becomes a case study in how neglect can be lethal and how suffering does not require chaos or violence to occur, only indifference and time. Aricion, Olympia, 564 BCE. The crowd at Olympia is already standing by the time it happens because the match has gone on too long, and both men are past the point of technique, operating instead on instinct and exhaustion, bodies slick with sweat and dust, locked together in a sport that has no rounds, no time limit, and no prohibition against killing an opponent. Aricion is competing in Pankration, a combat event that allows nearly anything except biting and eye gouging, and he is already a champion, respected not just for strength, but for endurance, the kind that wins matches only after the opponent has nothing left to give. Late in the fight, his opponent locks in a choke from behind, using the forearm to compress the neck while wrapping the legs around the torso, a position that cuts off blood flow to the brain and air to the lungs at the same time, and witnesses later describe Aricion's body stiffening as oxygen deprivation sets in. Instead of tapping out, he counters. Using what little leverage remains, he dislocates his opponent's ankle, a sudden, violent movement that forces an immediate submission, and the referee signals victory at the exact moment Aricion's body gives out. He collapses. There is no celebration, because it becomes clear almost immediately that he is no longer breathing, his neck crushed and his airway compromised long enough to cause fatal asphyxiation, meaning the winning move and the fatal injury overlap in the same instant. Aricion is declared the victor posthumously. A laurel wreath is placed on a corpse. His death becomes infamous not because of cruelty or malice, but because it represents a kind of extremity that modern audiences rarely confront, a death earned by refusing to survive, where victory is technically achieved only because the body failed after the opponents. It is remembered as one of the most unsettling deaths in sport, not for how it looked, but for what it meant. The Portuguese nobleman, Lisbon, 1759. In Lisbon's public square, the execution is meant to be seen. The man brought forward is a Portuguese nobleman condemned for treason, accused of conspiring against King José the Firm, and the punishment chosen is not hanging or beheading, but something far slower, something designed to unfold across hours rather than moments. He is tied to a wooden wheel. The sentence calls for every major bone in his body to be broken systematically with iron hammers, not randomly, not in rage, but according to procedure, with executioners working methodically from the limbs inward, spacing each blow so the body remains conscious and alive as long as possible. Witness accounts describe the sound first, dull and wet, followed by visible deformation as arms and legs lose structural integrity, while the condemned remains bound in place, unable to move as bones fracture beneath skin that is not pierced, only stretched and bruised. Between strikes, the executioners pause. This is intentional. The breaks are spaced out to prevent shock from ending the process prematurely, and once the skeleton has been destroyed, the body is left exposed in the square, bound to the wheel under the sun, where dehydration, internal bleeding, and organ failure continue the punishment long after the hammers stop. He does not die quickly. Hours pass. By the time death finally occurs, it is no longer clear whether the body fails from trauma, exposure, or the cumulative collapse of systems that can no longer support themselves without a functional frame. The execution is recorded, approved, and publicly justified, meant as a warning rather than an aberration, and it becomes one of the most infamous examples of state-sanctioned cruelty in Portuguese history. What makes it especially disturbing is not just the violence, but the precision, the patience, and the fact that suffering was not a side effect, but the point. Vasily Ignatenko, Chernobyl, 1986. When Reactor 4 explodes at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the early hours of April 26, 1986, the men who arrive first are not scientists or specialists, but firefighters, dispatched to what they are told is a routine industrial blaze, unaware that the reactor core has been torn open and is actively emitting lethal radiation into the night air. Vasily Ignatenko is among them. He climbs onto the roof to extinguish fires caused by burning graphite ejected from the reactor, fragments that look solid and inert, but are, in reality, pieces of the exposed core itself, each one emitting levels of radiation that overwhelm the body in minutes. There is no immediate collapse. Radiation sickness does not announce itself loudly at first, and by the time symptoms begin, metallic taste, nausea, disorientation, the damage is already total, cellular structures breaking down faster than the body can respond. Ignatenko is hospitalized in Moscow, where doctors quickly realize the exposure was catastrophic, but treatment continues anyway, involving transfusions, isolation, and intensive care that can manage symptoms but cannot reverse the destruction already underway. Over the following days and weeks, his condition worsens steadily. The skin darkens and blisters as underlying tissue dies. Internal organs begin to fail as blood vessels lose integrity and infections take hold in a body whose immune system has effectively been erased, while family members are allowed to visit despite the radiation still present in bodily fluids. Witnesses later describe the physical breakdown not as a single event, but as a continuous process, tissue deteriorating in stages, organs shutting down one by one, until death arrives not as relief, but as the final system to fail. Ignatenko dies on May 13, 1986. His death becomes emblematic of Chernobyl, not because it was unique, but because it was representative, a human body exposed directly to forces it was never meant to survive, with medical care able to slow the timeline, but not change the outcome. Byford Dolphin Incident, North Sea, 1983. The accident happens in seconds, but its effects are so extreme that investigators struggle to describe them without sounding exaggerated. The Byford Dolphin is a semi-submersible oil rig operating in the North Sea, using saturation diving, a system where divers live under high pressure for extended periods, allowing them to work at depth without repeated decompression. provided pressure changes are controlled precisely. On November 5th, 1983, during a routine transfer between a pressurized chamber and a diving bell, a clamp is opened prematurely. The pressure difference is catastrophic. In less than a second, the chamber explosively decompresses from 9 atmospheres to normal atmospheric pressure, and the human body, which cannot equalize pressure remotely that fast, fails instantly at a physical level. Death is immediate. Not because of injury in the conventional sense, but because internal pressure overwhelms structural limits, causing fatal trauma before the nervous system can process pain or fear. Investigators later note that survival was impossible and that the incident represents one of the most extreme examples of environmental physics acting on the human body, where timing, procedure, and mechanical failure intersect with irreversible consequences. The case becomes infamous in industrial safety history, not for negligence alone, but for how narrow the margin for error truly was and how unforgiving the environment proved to be.